Kehun Chan wrote this article for Polygon earlier this week on Monday. Games need to return to black and white morality. And this caused a bit of a stir in the game industry, Twitter. I think there are some interesting discussions to be had within this, but I generally do not agree with the point that they are making in this article. Echo, what does that mean? We will get to it. I'm going to go through the article with you and comment on it. So, from young adult writer Ava J to author K.M. Wayland, the axiom that morally gray characters are more compelling than traditional heroes is advice many writers dole out these days. I am not familiar with the writing scene and what kind of advice is given to writers, but that could be, sure. Bemoaning the lack of tension in stories around black and white morality, many writers believe readers prefer the unpredictability of gray morality, which is in stark contrast to the clear, objective morality in black and white tales. And this term, objective morality, comes up a lot in this article written by Ki-Hon Chan. And I'm going to refer to Ki-Hon Chan as they because I'm not sure of their gender, to be honest. I don't know it from the name because it is a name that I am not familiar with. Yeah, so this objective morality is I'll talk about that a bit once we go forward. Then there's the gray morality of prestige games like The Last of Us 2 and BioShock Infinite, featuring characters that are a menagerie of trauma and barely disguised flaws, never able to rise above their own worst impulses. And I think this is like I think this is a fair criticism for The Last of Us Part 2, that the characters don't question what they're doing enough, and I agree with that criticism. I think that's valid criticism. Their personalities blend together like sloppy gray sludge. The good guys are bad, the bad guys may be good, or at least well-intentioned, and it's all, well, gray. I do not agree with this part. Like, they're saying that black and white games have objective morality, and it's easy to say these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. But in games like Last of Us Part 2, where morality is more gray, everyone becomes the same, you know? If you're good, you might as well be bad, or if you're bad, you might as well be good. No, that's not how that works. That's absolutely not how that works. Gray morality presents a worldview that states these two poles aren't that different, a perspective that actually widens the disparity in our fractured world. Our lives are already gray, and these shades seem to keep getting muddier. No, that's not really how that works. Gray morality, the whole point of it is to show that people are complex beings and can't really be broken down into good and bad that easily. Sometimes it's really clear, like, this person is a bad person, but sometimes, like, that type of breakdown just doesn't make sense, because if, say, we start talking about why do people commit crime, for example, if we look at it from a black and white lens, you'll say people commit crimes because they're bad, which means that those people are inherently somehow irredeemable, and it makes it easier to punish them. Whereas if we look at it in a more nuanced way, we say, well, crime is due to socioeconomic conditions because people are poor, they have to do crime to survive, etc., etc., etc. So it definitely is not the case. The distrust of black and white tales may stem from the prominence in many children-friendly franchises. This definitely could be the case, yes. Mario saves the princess while Bowser kidnaps her. Guybrush Threepwood of Monkey Island fame rescues his lover as the earnest wannabe outlaw, the antithesis of LeChuck's scheming undead pirate captain. Samus Aran blasts aliens to smithereens versus the ghastly Mother Brain, who's the brains behind the machinations of Metroid, I guess. Tales of black and white morality feature enemies that have always been bad, this is the thing that I don't like, and will always be bad, while the heroes are good and always find a way to succeed despite the odds, even if they have to strain against their own moral codes. even though games featuring such morality have fallen out of fashion, we still need more of such tales of absolute morality in games, back to the days of where goodness and evil are staunchly and dynamically opposed in their stories. So, saying that we don't want black and white morals in games, I don't think is true. I mean, there still are games that have black and white morals. I mean, definitely games that, like The Last of Us Part 2, where things are more nuanced and, as he says, muddier, have become more popular because in the generation before, the morality systems in our games was very gamified. You know, look at Mass Effect, where it's like, would you like to be the angel or the devil? And like, we don't act like that. We don't act that way as people. So we have gotten to a more nuanced take on this. But this idea of absolute morality or objective morality is really hard to achieve and prove. Like, how do we say that something is objectively moral? That's a very difficult topic because killing is bad. If we take that as an objective moral to say, yes, killing is bad, which in general we say it is. However, if you are in a life-threatening situation and in self-defense, you kill someone, this can be, depending on the situation, acceptable. Or, let's say, an invading force comes to your community and tries to kill your people. Defending yourself and maybe killing some people in this instance can be justified. These are, of course, extremely nuanced moral dilemmas. I'm not saying like in all situations it's okay. It's very, very case by case. But if we take an objective or absolutist view on that, killing can never be okay. Which becomes a problem because then you might not be able to defend yourself in some situations. So this type of objective morality or absolute morality is really, really, really difficult to say. And who decides that is also a really important factor. Who decides what is objective or absolute morality? If it's the people in power, then that's going to be, well, whoever it is, to be honest. Whoever decides it will decide it from their lens and their point of view, in which case it will be biased and therefore it will not be absolute nor objective. So I don't think we can achieve this type of thing in games where we have objective, absolute values. Of course, we can have more simplified morals in some games. You know, not every game needs to be an introspection into the darkness of the human nature. No, it can sometimes be, this person was kidnapped. I will save them from the evil, and that's fine. It's fine. But saying that this is what we should strive for? I don't know about that. Stories are inherently moral, so this... Spoiler warning for The Last of Us Part 2. If you do not want to get spoiled, I'm going to put my finger up like this. Once it has gone down, we have gone through that part. If you don't want to get spoiled, mute it right now. There's a slight spoiler for the beginning. Nothing more. And then later on for Last of Us 1. But, spoiler alert. Many AAA games lend credence to the argument that moral ambiguities inherently make it for richer, better narratives. Yes, that is often seen that way, and it's not necessarily always the case. The Last of Us Part 2 was certainly a success. The Far Cry series shows no sign of slowing down. One author takes this step further by skewing this concept of good and evil altogether in fiction. So despite the recent preference for gray stories, however, black and white morality has always been hardwired into our consciousness. Stories are inherently moral. This part I do agree with. There's something to that. That can be seen in how we are instinctively drawn to those who we admire and define as heroes, even in morally gray games. No matter how much developers prefer heroes and villains that are sympathetic, games always implicitly frame characters as heroic or villainous, even if they go out of their way to get us to sympathize with the villain or question the hero's motives. So this idea that we are hardwired to like black and white morality doesn't hold any scrutiny in my case. The fact that we like black and white morality is a product of our society and upbringing, because we are told stories that are in black and white, and because it is easier to think in black and white, because we are taught to do that. It's not a hardwired thing at all. This is absolutely not true. We are not hardwired into this. We learn this. Like, no, I don't agree with this. And because of this learned pattern, of course, we want to try to find the heroes and villains in stories and in real life as well. We want to think, like, if something bad happens, like, who is the villain, who is the good guy? Because it's easier to think in these paradigms, but it's usually a lot more nuanced than that. Like, yes, easier to think in us and them, absolutely. This is going to be a spoiler for The Last of Us Part 1, though, slightly. In these titles, so titles such as The Last of Us and Far Cry, in these titles, the good guys, it should be noted, almost always win, even if their actions may not necessarily be moral. Joel from The Last of Us still garners plenty of sympathy despite his excessive rampage and outbursts through the series. The tension of the game's brutal final act comes from the contrast between how we have been led to perceive him and his actions in the most important scene in the game. But that decision loses its impact unless we already mark him as the hero. The twist is emotionally resonant only as much as it contrasts with our expectations of Joel as the hero we are rooting for. Even in the stories with no clearly defined heroes and antagonists, the audience still seeks the black and white among these shades of gray. It's all more evident in the latest Last of Us Part 2, where Joel's decision and ultimate fate have still largely been met with sympathy. Yes, so I super don't agree with this. The reason why the ending of The Last of Us Part 1 is so gut-wrenching is because we have been shown Joel is not painted as the hero in Last of Us Part 1 at all. Like, that's not the case. He's not a good guy, and the game doesn't try to paint him as such. He is a sympathetic person because we are shown his past of losing his daughter and seeing as Ellie as kind of a surrogate for her daughter and trying to build a parental relationship with that. And the ending is literally what Milo was talking about, the trolley problem. The ending is the trolley problem. Will you let one person die so many can be saved? And that is why that ending is so gut-wrenching, because we are built to understand that to Joel, the relationship between Joel and Ellie is a parental one and a substitute for his lost daughter. Not lost, but dead daughter. So then the ending becomes a difficult moral dilemma because we understand that. Not because we paint Joel as a hero, but because we understand that where he is coming from into this situation. But we aren't allowed to make the choice even. No, we're not. We are not allowed to make that choice at the end, Mila. We have to live with Joel's choice. And that's why it's conflicting to us, because many of us would have said like, no, you shouldn't have done that, Joel. And some people are like, I understand where he came from. And that's what makes it fun and interesting. Well, not fun, but interesting. But to say that it's just because Joel is seen as the hero is why we feel bad about it is absolutely not true. The twists and turns of black and white tales. The objective morality of black and white stories does deliver the dramatic tension that many seek in morally gray stories. The latter typically taking place in a desolate universe where anyone can be muddied by the corruptible stench of depravity, or even just the need to survive. So much gray pop culture exists in worlds where terrible acts beget terrible consequences, the cycles of violence wrought by morally ambiguous characters persisting endlessly. The most famous example being the depressingly gray universe of Game of Thrones, where endless bloodshed wrought by its characters against each other has always been par for the course. Or the grimdark world of The Witcher, with Geralt of Rivia earning his reputation as the Butcher of Blaviken for killing a much-maligned monster who had been a victim herself. It's harder to make characters feel trapped in their circumstances when they can always compromise on their subjective sense of moral code and do something underhanded, an action that may feel uncharacteristic for them, just to keep the story moving. Instead, the steadfast nature of black and white stories forces their characters to walk a moral tightrope, which is far more than just a pedestrian or idealistic view of morality. These tales exemplify triumphing over personal struggles, a popular theme in stories, allowing heroes the opportunity to explore the depths of their conviction. I really don't agree with this. Like, yeah, in black and white stories, you can definitely play with the characters sticking to their morals and the difficulty of that, sure. But I mean, you can do those in gray stories as well? Like, the Butcher of Blaviken example is a really poor one because that is a moral dilemma for Geralt. Like, does Geralt allow the person to go and kill another person because of their past crimes? And yeah, Maligned Monster is like, the person here is looking at The Witcher from a black and white perspective, which it's not meant to be like that. Or like Game of Thrones. Yeah, Game of Thrones is a very, very dark show. It is, that's true. And I can understand that they might not enjoy that, like, depressing darkness of the show, and that's fine. That's totally fine. If you're like, I want something more upbeat and non-depressing, like, that's fine. That's totally fine. But to say that black and white stories are better because the characters have to uphold their moral code, whereas in these muddied stories they can just do whatever they want because whatever, morals don't matter, right? That's not how it works. In these more gray stories, there's a lot of struggle with one's values and seeing, because the world is not black and white, so they have to make compromises in order to sometimes uphold their values, or sometimes noticing, hey, upholding the value strictly doesn't make sense. This person wants more simple, lighthearted stories. All right, fine. But yeah, I just don't agree with that the black and white stories are better because in gray stories you can just, do whatever the fuck you want because your subjective morals don't matter. Morals are subjective, like we talked about before. Morals are not objective because that comes with a lot of problems, and morals are always created through some lens, which means they cannot be objective. This has been explored before by Polygon's opinions editor Ben Kuchera, in which he argues that Captain America's tale of staying true to his convictions in a morally gray universe makes for a more compelling tale than that of Superman's. Putting uncompromising characters in a complicated world is a recipe for dramatic tension rather than a way to avoid complexity and more adult themes. I agree, yeah. Putting characters with very strict moral codes in complicated worlds is interesting. Absolutely, it is interesting. But it's not because it's black and white, it's because we have a character who is rigid put into situations where he has to bend, or they have to bend. That's why it's interesting. Not because it's black and white, but because we think to ourselves what we would do if we were in that situation. Would we bend? Would we not? It's interesting. Undertale is one example, even as it lets you discover the limits of your morality. Here you can choose to be good or evil, either wholeheartedly embrace goodness through the pacifist route by sparing any monster you run into, or lean into wickedness by slaughtering everything you meet. This game doesn't believe in ambiguities. There's no conclusion to be had when you embark on a morally grey route of killing some monsters but freeing others. And if you decide to commit wanton genocide, it presents your decision as motivated by a force of incomprehensible darkness. There's no heartbreaking backstory that gives you any room to shrug and explain away your choice. The result is a deeply emotive narrative with many players feeling palpable sense of discomfort even as they commit a dark path. I mean, yeah, sure. Undertale does do this, sure, that's true. That this again could be argued that this is a reflection of, you can reflect on yourself, like doing these horrible deeds really is wrong. And I mean, like I said, we can have stories like this, and it's fine. It's this sense of uneasiness that reminds players of their own moral leanings. This dynamic can only emerge from the absolute contrast between good and evil, as plain as black and white on the diametrically opposed poles of a morality. A Plague Tale: Innocence showcases instances of this polarity seen in the dastardly deeds of the Catholic Church and the deathly plague of rats, which contrast with the innocence of De Rune siblings as they tried to survive during the 100 Years' War. Unlike most video game protagonists, 15-year-old Amicia de Rune doesn't kill for sport, often finding herself in a moralistic bind of having to kill despite not wanting to. Her combat prowess, also limited to the durability of her slingshot and being spotted by any enemy soldiers, means putting herself and her younger brother in danger. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is not black and white. This specifically is that she doesn't want to kill, but she has to in order to survive, and doing so puts her in danger and her sibling in danger. This is a gray area. This is a gray area. This is not black and white. I haven't played Plague Tale Innocence, so I don't know if it goes more into that, but in the way that the writer describes this most definitely is a gray area, not black and white. What is crucial is the depiction of the almost cartoonishly evil Catholic priest, the sort of thing that is frequently deemed a cardinal sin in fiction. I mean, I don't know if it really is. It could be, I get it. Like, it depends on the story, I guess. Sometimes it can be a bad thing, sometimes it doesn't matter. And in this story, it's not the notoriety of the church that demands nuance. What A Plague Tale Innocence seeks to impress upon you is the hero's endless struggle to remain alive without losing their humanity, even in the face of abject wretchedness. Even the Plague of Rats, symbolic of Europe's Black Death in the mid-1300s, devours their victims indiscriminately, be it villager or soldier. It's an inexplicable force of nature that simply has no real allegiance to any moral code, landing outside the axis of good and evil. The world may be morally grey, but the characters fall simply into the archetypes of good or bad, which does little to minimize the story. Well, from the description that the writer gave, no, the character does not. At least the character of who you're playing as the protagonist. Because they don't want to kill, but they do kill. That's a gray area. It's not black and white. For the villain, I mean, yeah, sure, okay. They are bad. I don't really see how the rats really play into that, but now this is where we get into the crazy twist of this story. It goes, it fucking goes places. Black and white morality in real life. But the concept of black and white morality doesn't just remain within the fictional realm. It has the capacity to influence how we frame and perceive real-life events. Unlike fiction, allowing a sense of moral dilemma over both sides, particularly in the current era of burgeoning social change, reinforces the kind of false equivalencies that might slow down social change. Consider the media's fixation on telling inspiring rags-to-riches tales of billionaires and AAA studios, even in the face of discomforting details about profiting from underpaid and oppressive labor practice. I agree that we romanticize rags-to-riches stories a lot without looking at the whole picture, but that wouldn't be a case of that black and white is better. That would be the opposite, because then we're painting these things as white purely rather than looking at the nuance, the grays. Or the sightings of police officers kneeling alongside protesters seem reminiscent of redemption arcs of anti-heroes, except in this case it's often alleged to be a publicity stunt before the police brutality begins again. Defense of the police and their violence appeals to our familiarity with the paradigm of grey in many stories about moral ambiguity as well. It's akin to a shield of incorruptibility. Good people can do bad things sometimes without being immoral themselves. What's also perfidious is the implication in grey stories that goodness is just a hair's difference away from badness, when it's a perspective steeped in privilege. The oppressor is as multifaceted as the oppressed, and the hero as capable of evil doings as the villain. This is, like, I feel like he is advocating for the complete opposite of what he is advocating for. Like, he's saying that, because the fact that we want to see the police as good is absolutely a case of our black and white viewpoint of, like, these are the defenders of justice, they are good because of that. Like, that's why they're viewed as good, and the fact that we view their kneeling thing as publicity stunts is because we understand the nuance, is because we understand that they do that so that we can be more lenient on them when they start bopping on heads and beating the fuck out of people. That's why they do it, because we have seen again and again in the US now of police kneeling and 2-3 hours later bopping the heads of the people they were kneeling with. Like, what is that if not a publicity stunt? Like, and good people can do bad things. Yes, they absolutely can. And that doesn't make them immoral necessarily. It's nuance. We can't just say a good person does a bad thing, they are no longer good, because then no one would be good. Everyone does bad things from time to time. It's the situation, it's the context, it's the severity that matters here. And sometimes goodness and badness can be a very tight line sometimes, and you know, it just do be like that. This perspective allows even the most racist or authoritarian among us to argue that their beliefs are just that, beliefs they are free to pursue and should be free to do so, instead of the reality of plain old, boring, and evil white supremacy or fascism. Video games love to blend the good and the bad themselves until they become a gray too, eventually and sometimes relentlessly symbolically arguing that all lives matter. This take is just, I don't understand where this is coming from. This already happens. Racists and authoritarians already are saying that they have this belief and it is their belief and therefore they can say it because they're free to express their beliefs. And the thing is, racists and authoritarians and fascists think they're right. They think they're on the side of good. So it doesn't help that we paint it in black and white because those people think that they're in the good. Like, this all lives matter thing at the end, well, it doesn't make any sense to me. What? I mean, a lot of games are like jingoistic and stuff, sure, but the most telling example of how gray morality undercuts storytelling is the infamous betrayal of Daisy Fitzroy, a black revolutionary from BioShock Infinite. Sorry, spoilers. She's revealed to be just as corruptible by the allure of power as her racist enemies, even as she was fighting for her people's emancipation from slavery. The white protagonist Booker DeWitt even spells it out. The only difference between Comstock, the game's big bad guy, and Fitzroy is how you spell the name, he says. It's a damning conclusion that the rebel faction is just as unethical as the nation's leaders, while plainly ignoring that its depiction of Jim Crow-era racism contained real-life parallels to the events that birthed the American Civil War. Now, I agree that the way that Fitzroy is presented in BioShock Infinite sucks. Like, it does suck. I agree, and it is not a good depiction of, you know, revolutionary action. I agree, but it's not bad because gray morality. That's not why it's bad. It's bad because it's painting everyone with the same, you know, both sides brush. What feels infuriating about this perspective is this: if you don't fight for your rights in the correct way, the polite civil way that fits snugly within frameworks of society, you will be tarred with the same brush as those who are actively bolstering the forces behind inequality. We see this in modern politics all the time. Politicians who take away healthcare are just doing their jobs, while those protesting against them for making medication unaffordable are framed as uncivil and dangerous. It's disingenuous to claim that both sides are equally at fault. One group is championing civil rights or access to healthcare, while the other is looking out for their own interests. I mean, I agree. What the writer is describing here is a bad thing. Like, absolutely, tone policing, by, you know, from the authority perspective of like, if you say things, you have to say them in the way that I want to hear them, otherwise I will discredit, is a bad thing. I agree. And politicians like doing austerity measures and then being like, just doing my job. Yeah, that's not acceptable in my opinion. I like these points that the writer's making here, I agree with, but I don't agree with where it comes from. And then cap it off. I'm not saying that gray stories are never compelling or that goodness cannot exist in gray universes, but setting ethical considerations aside to craft such fictions in games, however, or other mediums, can be actively disempowering. We don't currently need more redemption stories about villains or tales about the corruptibility of heroes. The number of games that tell us heroes and villains aren't that different has become numbing and demoralizing. What I crave, and what I think we deserve, are black and white games centered around the concept of absolute objective morality by Being committed to righteousness can be conflicting, but that's the strength of truly good characters versus the abject danger of truly bad ones. Watching our heroes stick to their convictions, even against insurmountable odds, ratchets up drama rather than destroying it. The concept that good can ultimately triumph over evil is a timeless one, and stories that rally around this trope, around the unadulterated hope, can help guide us through the year's ceaseless onslaught of calamities. I mean, we can have both? Is what I'm saying. We can have both, but I mean, again, this idea of a concept of absolute objective morality doesn't exist. That's the problem here. Like, I understand that this person is probably tired because the world is in a very shit place, and they want more stories that inspire hope in us. I think that's a very fair thing to ask for in such trying times, you know. They want more hopeful stories so they can be more hopeful of the future. I think that's very fair. Yeah. They don't really feel like playing games that are very dark and depressing, which The Last of Us 2 is a very heavy game to play. I think that's totally fair, but trying to be like, I want stuff where everything is black and white, where there's objectively bad people and objectively good people, is like... It doesn't, like, that objective morality doesn't exist. I'm sorry, but that doesn't exist. All morality is viewed by some lens, some philosophy, some perspective that makes it subjective. That's just how it unfortunately is. And again, like, we can have both. We can have games that are very hopeful and more lighthearted, and we can have the darker, more heavier games as well. We can have both for sure, but I don't think this can be fixed by games becoming more black and white rather than more gray. I don't think that solves the problem. I don't think this is what leads to us having societal issues. I don't think this leads for us to being like, well, good people and bad people are actually all the same. There's not really a difference in them. I don't think that's the case at all with making more gray and nuanced games. If anything, black and white stories can be harmful because they present the world in a very simplistic way through a particular lens, saying this is bad and this is good, and then we can start using that too much, saying like, the protesters are bad because they did this, the police are good because they are the police, you know? So I think this person wanting to have more hopeful stories in a time of distress, totally fine, but I don't think the reason for the distress, the reason for how we view the world, or how people assign value to different political things right now, is because we have gray stories. I don't think that's the case. So that's my take on this issue, this article. Hello there, and thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below in the comments, or you can visit my stream on Twitch where I can answer any of your questions. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 PM Central European Time. We talk about news and games, news in the world from a leftist point of view, and also play some games. Come hang out with us, it'll be fun. Bye!